Um, my name is Caroline. Welcome to my channel. If you're watching this video, you probably know me in real life. So, yes. Um, when I was originally trying to come up with a video concept for this, I was trying to think of something that would be interesting for everyone to watch. And then I remembered that it's my channel and I can do what I want. So, and also as resident fashion history nerd in many of my friends' lives and my family's lives, um, I feel like I should bring this information to you. And if you are a fashion history nerd or just a fashion nerd like me, you probably have noticed that medieval or Middle Ages inspired fashion has been coming back into fashion recently in uh, end of 2024 and beginning of 2025. So today, I want to talk about why that is and what that entails. Throughout history, fashion has always been about more than just clothes. Our clothes are a reflection of our society's values, our economic structures, our artistic expressions. So recently, we've been seeing this resurgence of medieval and Middle Ages aesthetics in fashion, from nightcore on Pinterest and TikTok, or even on high fashion runways. So, what does this say about our society and our cultural climate now? And why is it happening now? To first understand this, we of course have to understand the Middle Ages and fashion in the Middle Ages. So, to understand the resurgence of medieval fashion, we need to examine the time period when fashion became a dynamic force in the world. This is mainly the late Middle Ages, the 1300s to the 1500s, primarily in Britain and France, as when we think of medieval, that's what we think of. So before this period, clothing was primarily functional. For those of the upper class who could afford nicer clothing, there was a fashion aspect to it. But for lower classes, clothes served their purpose covering the body. However, trade and commerce flourished in the late Middle Ages across Europe. An increasing number of people beyond the aristocracy could afford fashionable clothing. So when they gained access to fabrics and embellishments and things like that that they didn't previously have access to, this spawned a new interest in fashionable clothes. The 1400s marked the beginning of essentially fashion trends, where in previous eras, garments would come into fashion and stay in fashion for multiple centuries. The 1400s saw a change in this, where clothing was in fashion for much shorter periods of time, like decades. During this time period, clothing construction also saw significant advancements. So, the introduction of gores, which is trapezoidal shaped panels, for having fitted garments shaped to the body or adding volume to skirts, we see that. Center front closures of clothes where they were able to add embellishment and individualize their clothing, as well as decorative elements like beading and embroidery. We see all of this in the 1400s. There's also the distinction now between fashionable everyday clothing and formal wear. So this put an emphasis on individuality and self expression in people's clothing. These developments in medieval Europe laid the groundwork for the fashion trends that we see today. Now, why do I say medieval fashion is coming back? Well, we might not see it without a trained eye, but in multiple places across fashion trends, we're seeing the resurgence of elements that are also staples of medieval fashion. So, first off, and I think the most damning piece of evidence is in Pinterest predictions of trends for the year of 2025, they predicted castlecore as a top aesthetic for the year, saying medieval is having a major moment. In 2025, Gen Z and millennials will take home decor inspiration from ancient castles, while fashion and accessories will be Gothic inspired. It's a comeback of the highest order. And also on that same page, citing an 110% boost of searches for medieval core on Pinterest. So already we're seeing increased interest in the aesthetics of the medieval era. Also, Paris Fashion Week just happened. Fashion designers at Paris Fashion Week showcase collections with intricate decorative elements, metallic textures, and furs in both the haute couture runways and the ready-to-wear collections. So let's look at that. The first thing I want to look at is some pieces by Armani. There is this coat that has embellishments down the center of it, which is just very reminiscent of medieval garments. Also, we see these two sets with decorative, opulent beading, which again evokes that feeling of dramatic lavishness that we associate with the medieval era. These Alexander McQueen coats as well have that dramatic and intricate embellishment on it, both of which hark back to the medieval era. Also, at Paris Fashion Week, we have seen lots of metallics. Metallic is coming back, it seems. This is reminiscent of course, armor and chainmail, and is kind of the modern adaptation of medieval armor in textiles. So we have this jacket and skirt set, and then this shirt by Lacoste, which is kind of this metallic fringe texture, which again looks like chainmail. This dress by Calpurni, and this by Christopher Esber, this tunic especially reminds me of medieval era fashion. I mean, looking at it, it looks like a piece of armor. Now, another trend that we see at Paris Fashion Week is furs. This, of course, is reminiscent of medieval royalty and aristocracy using furs as embellishment on their clothing, even going so far as to ban the peasantry from using certain kinds of animal furs in their clothing. So we have this coat by Alexander McQueen that is very reminiscent of royalty. And then we have this by Elie Saab, this long open coat. It is essentially the medieval garment of a mantle, which there were open and closed mantles, but it is essentially an open, long garment that is worn over a dress. This is essentially one. And of course, celebrities also influence fashion as well. I think in this case, we have to especially thank Chappell Roan for her influence on bringing back medieval aesthetics in her VMA red carpet outfit, in her performance at the VMAs, in which she wore a full suit of armor, and in her chainmail outfit that she wore accepting her VMAs award. All of these very much are medieval inspired. And finally, last year we saw pop culture and seasonal trends reflect medieval fashion as well. There was a trend of being Joan of Arc for Halloween, which was admittedly controversial. But again, this is reflecting a growing fascination with the medieval aesthetic, with armor, and with its symbolism. So now we've looked at what medieval fashion looks like and the proof that it's coming back into fashion. But now let's look at why it's coming back into fashion. So fashion tends to operate in cycles, moving between extremes. In early 2022, we saw the emergence of the clean girl aesthetic, and this dominated popular culture. It was characterized by minimalism, modernism, beige tones, and understated elegance. But, as we know, fashion tends to swing like a pendulum. So now we're seeing a dramatic reversal of this. We're seeing deep colors, ornate fabrics, and bold embellishments. But why are we seeing medieval specifically and not just another lavish aesthetic? I think this lies in the coquette trend that has been happening recently. I see the coquette trend as a stepping stone between our clean girl aesthetic and medieval aesthetic. Heavily inspired by Regency and Victorian aesthetics, the coquette trend is all about opulence, but in a cute way, using pastel tones and little bows, little embellishments. So it's a lavish aesthetic, but in a mild mannered way. So I really think this bridges the gap between our initial minimalist aesthetic and the medieval aesthetic we're seeing now. As we move towards more subversive fashion, I think that we're going to see even more of the edgier elements of medieval fashion, like the metallics of the armor, religious symbolism, weapons, things like that. Additionally, I think that we can credit the rejection of fast fashion with part of the resurgence of the medieval aesthetic. As concerns about mass production and fast fashion grow, we are seeing a focus on artisan and craftsman goods. Because this is what people would have had access to in the Middle Ages, it makes sense that we're seeing a resurgence of interest in this. It emphasizes handcrafted textiles, embroidery, and structured tailoring that all celebrate individuality over uniformity. In our lives that are now increasingly dominated by digital interactions, wearing clothing that feels tangible, rich in history, and is visually striking serves as both an escape from our current cultural state and as a form of self expression. So, whether you're drawn to the elegance and the opulence of medieval royalty and nobility, or to the strength conveyed through armor inspired fashion, I think it's clear that medieval fashion is on its way back and it will be here to stay for a while. I find the cyclical nature of fashion and anything history related extremely interesting, and I love to ramble about it. So, if you are also interested in that, or if you're my friend, because then you're required to subscribe to me, please subscribe. Um, Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.